Already the American people had given up some of the freedoms in our Bill of Rights to a misnamed Patriot Act. Our freedom of speech was under attack. This is some of what I said on March 15th, 2003, on the eve of the war. First, I gave a couple of quotes. Quote, "This war is a defensive war. It was forced upon us by our enemies who wish to destroy our nation. The only thing we cannot afford to lose in this war is our freedom, the foundation of our life and our future. No one has the right to complain about limitations on his personal freedom caused by the war," unquote. Joseph Goebbels, 1943. Quote, "Why, of course the people don't want war, but it is the leaders who determine policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country," unquote. Hermann Goering, Nazi Germany. Final quote, "Beware the leader who bangs the drums of war in order to whip the citizenry into a patriotic fervor. The citizenry infused with fear and blinded by patriotism will offer up all of their rights unto the leader. How do I know? For this is what I have done," unquote. Julius Caesar. I've been severely criticized for speaking out in opposition to this war. So have you. Again, I was speaking to a peace rally. We're told that we're aiding and abetting the enemy. We're told that we should support the president no matter what. We're told that patriotism demands that we support the war. They say that we're abusing the freedoms that our troops are in the Middle East defending. They say we should be ashamed to be protesting while the troops are in the desert protecting our right to do so. Well, I say hogwash. I feel an affinity. I feel an affinity for the troops deployed in Kuwait. They're my comrades in arms. I admire their sense of honor and sacrifice. I understand why they believe they should be there. They have neither the experience nor the wisdom to see past the lies they've been told. The truth is, they are not over there protecting our freedoms. Our freedoms are not under attack by Saddam Hussein. Our freedoms are under attack by John Ashcroft. They are threatened by John Poindexter. They are trampled by Donald Rumsfeld. They are disdained by Dick Cheney. And they are not even understood by George W. Bush. The battle to preserve our freedoms is not taking place in the Persian Gulf. It's taking place in Central Park in New York City, in Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. You are the shock troops battling to preserve our cherished freedoms by exercising them in spite of opposition and ridicule. You are the foot soldiers protecting our civil rights. You are the Minutemen sounding the alarm against tyranny. You are upholding the spirit of the American Revolution. You are preserving the freedoms that the troops in the desert have a right to come back to. The troops surrounding Iraq are not protecting us. We are protecting them and their honor and their freedoms. We are about to set off on a forced march through hostile territory to defend their freedoms and ours and the ideals America was founded on. We are protecting this nation by speaking truth to power, and we're still doing it today. Let us do it loudly and fearlessly and courageously and joyfully, for we are the true patriots. Here is the truth that we proclaim. This war has nothing to do with national security or freedom or democracy or human rights or protecting our allies or weapons of mass destruction or defeating terrorism or disarming Iraq. It has to do with money, it has to do with oil, and it has to do with raw imperial power. This illegal, immoral war would destroy the great nation we inherited from our fathers who died in World War II. It would complete the transition from America being the most loved, admired, respected, and envied nation in the world to the most feared and hated country, an outcast from the world community, a pariah among the peoples, and the #1 rogue nation on earth. This sadistic corporate war would incense the Arab world, provide thousands of new Osama bin Ladens, and enormously increase the terrorist threat. Do you want your children used as hired killers in this war? I say no. Peace is patriotic. A preemptive war is immoral, illegal, unconstitutional, a war crime, and treason. Now let's go speak truth to power. God bless America. Again, that was March 15th, 2003, on the eve of the Iraq War. Now, the point of this little bit of history is that we knew better, you and I. We knew what this war would do to our country. We knew what it would do to our reputation in the world. We knew what it would do to the safety of our people. We weren't taken in by the lies of 9/11, by the doctored and manipulated intelligence, and by the outright untruths we were told to justify this war. Now, here we are, 4 years and 3,070 American lives later. It is also hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives and hundreds of billions of American dollars later. This misguided war has cost American more lives than 9/11 and has dragged on longer than World War II. Yet we still have no accountability for how this war started. We know that lily-livered members of Congress from both parties abdicated their constitutional responsibility to declare war or not, just gave the president a blank check. We also know that they were lied to by the Bush and his people. What I can't figure out is how they believed those lies. I sure didn't. Are the members of Congress that much more stupid than we are? Or are they just lapdogs for the fat cats? Those of us opposing the war and opposing the lies of 9/11 have gone from a tiny minority to a large majority of the American people. Rumsfeld is gone. Democrats have Congress. And yet our representatives have still not held Bush accountable for his lies. What on earth is wrong with them? It's a hackneyed expression, and you've heard it many times, but it's true. Clinton lied, no one died. If it was okay to impeach Clinton for fibbing about an event which only embarrassed his family and soiled a blue dress, why is it not appropriate to impeach Bush and Cheney for deceiving us into a war costing so many thousands of lives? Where's the accountability? If it was right for Nixon to be forced to resign under threat of impeachment for covering up an attempt to peek at the other party's plans? Why is it not right for us to get rid of those responsible for two deadly wars of aggression, the loss of habeas corpus, spying on American citizens, torturing suspects in the phony war on terror, saddling our grandchildren with trillions in debt, giving away our sovereignty with the North American Union, and subverting the Constitution itself? Where is the accountability? Much has changed since Bush took office 6 years ago. Nearly 3,000 died on 9/11. Many more than that have died in his wars and occupations. There are more than 23,000 seriously wounded soldiers whose lives will never be the same. There are tens of thousands of young men and women with serious psychological problems because what they have seen and what they have done. There are probably 100,000 poisoned by depleted uranium who will suffer lives of pain and disability and who will father thousands of children with severe birth defects. There is a mounting national debt which comes to about $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. Our military services are depleted and demoralized. The National Guard and reserves have been subjected to tour after tour, disrupting lives for even the lucky ones who return unscathed. Jobs have been lost, marriages have been destroyed, homes have been foreclosed, children have been estranged, and natural disasters like Katrina have been undealt with. And still, there is no accountability. In addition, religious liberty in Iraq has been lost. Mosques have been destroyed. Essential services have been disrupted. People have been tortured. Cities like Fallujah lie in ruins, and hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians have become casualties of our government's war of aggression. In spite of heroic efforts by the vast majority of our young men and women in uniform, most of the people of Iraq are worse off than they were before we liberated them. As a result, our reputation in the world has suffered, and we are the understandable target of hatred throughout the Arab and Muslim nations. 4 years of war have destroyed Iraq, destroyed our standing in the world, destroyed our national security, destroyed our civil liberties, destroyed precious lives, and brought our nation to the brink of financial disaster. And it was all predictable because we, in fact, predicted it. But has the president apologized? Have the members of his rubber-stamped Congress apologized? Have they admitted that they were wrong and we were right? Of course not. The hundreds of billions of dollars spent on this war have not just vanished after all. They have gone to Condoleezza Rice's ExxonMobil and Dick Cheney's Halliburton and George Bush's Carlyle Group, and through their lobbyists into the pockets of congressional incumbents. And perhaps that's why there is no accountability. How much longer are we going to put up with this? When are the peace movement and the 9/11 truth movement and the human rights movement and the fiscal conservatives going to get together and demand accountability? When are we going to quit acting like the nutcases we're accused of being and take responsible, effective action? When are we going to take back America for the people? When are we going to demand a government which does three things? 1, follow the Constitution. 2, honor the truth. And 3, serve the people. I've talked a lot about the Iraq War. It's one of my passions. And it should be yours too, because without the new Pearl Harbor of 9/11, it could not have happened. And it is reason enough for that new investigation. The folks outside protesting as we came in think our government would never murder 3,000 of its own citizens. But they have murdered more than that in this war, unnecessary, illegal, unconscionable war of aggression. And there is no denying that. There is no passing the buck. There is no denying responsibility. There is no question about who done it. There's a Bible verse which says, there is no longer male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. I'd like to adapt that idea to our purpose. There is no longer Republican nor Democrat, conservative nor liberal, hawk nor dove. There are only we patriots demanding accountability and speaking truth to power. God bless America, and God grant us regime change in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Bob Bowman, ladies and gentlemen. All right, now before we move into our next part, if anybody has any questions that they wrote on those cards, if you could just pass them towards the people in the center aisle here, and then we can just come and collect them from the people on the end. So, why do we do this? Why do we speak out and work to build the 9/11 truth movement? Don't we have better and more important things to do? I sometimes hear from other anti-war activists. Well, I've got my own response, but I don't think anyone can put it better than our next guest. Dr. Kevin Barrett has 3 master's degrees and a PhD in African language and literature in Arabic, and he has been dedicating himself to exposing this fraud. He was not afraid to speak out in his class, which led to his appearance on the Bill O'Reilly Show and a number of death threats. He's been on Hannity and Combs. He's got 2 radio programs on Genesis Communications Network and Republic Broadcasting Network, and he's got 2 new books out. One of them is called Truth Jihad. The other one is called 9/11 in the American Empire, Muslims, Christians, and Jews Speak Out. And he's been an extremely gracious guest. He came here a few days ago. He stayed do an appearance at a film festival we did. He's done 2 book signings, and he's going on tour to other cities, and he's doing everything possible to spread the truth. So I'd like to turn the mic over now to Dr. Kevin Barrett.
Well, thank you, and thanks, Adam, for the great introduction, and thank you to all of the great people who helped organize this fantastic event and did a wonderful job of a first-time big event right here in Ann Arbor. Dr. Bob Bowman is a pretty hard act to follow, so I think I'll try to keep this kind of short so we can get to the all-important Q&A. Now, why is the Q&A important? Well, because I think there are people from different viewpoints out here, so let me go into my prepared text. Ladies and gentlemen, enemy combatants and conspiracy theorists, wearers of tinfoil hats, and the more sartorially conventional. I'm glad to see a variety of perspectives out there, but one thing I can tell you is that every single one of you in this room regarding 9/11 is a conspiracy theorist. I appreciate the folks who come in tinfoil hats symbolizing their belief in the Osama and 19 young Arabs conspiracy theory of 9/11. The conspiracy theory that would have it that a guy nearing death from kidney disease on dialysis in a cave in Afghanistan was responsible for this deed, along with 19 fanatical Islamic fundamentalists who just happened to be lovers of lap dances, prostitutes, jaunts to Las Vegas, and trips on Abramov's casino boats. And who spent, some of them who allegedly spent their last nights on earth before going to meet Allah in a lap dance club. So we're all conspiracy theorists here, and I think we need to get used to that. And I'm actually, happy to see different opinions, although I have to admit that, I appreciate that this is not like the G8 summit, where the protesters vastly outnumber the attendees. I think here looks like the attendees outnumber the protesters. But protests for 9/11 truth events are actually a really good thing. I learned that the hard way. Over the summer, people were protesting the things I was saying and calling for my termination at the University of Wisconsin. In the fall, though, I really learned it in the fall when we organized an event sponsored by the folklore program at the University of Wisconsin called 9/11 Fact and Folklore. And we needed to get some people there because we just got the room a week before the event, and the BBC was coming to cover us. So we said, how are we going to fill up this big room? It was almost as big as this room. And I didn't have any time to do any publicity. And Jim Fetzer, who was there also, he had just come to Madison. So he didn't know any ways of getting publicity. And so as a last-ditch effort to try and get some people to show up for the BBC cameras, we said, well, how about sending an email to Steve Nass? The man with one N too many, I call him. Steve Nass, the guy who called for my firing at the University of Wisconsin and started the whole ball rolling towards throwing me before the cameras on Fox News. So we sent an email to Steve Nass, this wild-eyed, Bushite member of the Wisconsin State Legislature. And Steve Nass immediately sent out a press release all over the state of Wisconsin saying, the BBC is coming to cover the evil conspiracy theorist Kevin Barrett in this room at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so all the newspapers in the state, of course, published this story. And lo and behold, we actually had some people there without us having to do anything. So I have to hand it to Steve Nass and to the other protesters who've been helping make these events a success. And my recent talk at the Altoona Public Library in the small town of Altoona, Wisconsin, once again there was a question of, will we fill up this 100-seat room in this very small town? And sure enough, people apparently, left some nasty, threatening messages at the library, and this became a news story. And when the event actually transpired, we packed about 150 people into the 100-person room and turned away dozens more, and every one of them was willing to listen to what I had to say. There wasn't actually a single protester there. Once again, they had helped us spread the word. So I thank all of you who are here, including those who came here for reasons that I wouldn't agree with, but hey, I defend your right to express yourself. And that's what it's all about in this country, and that's the topic that we're supposed to be talking about here, which brings me to the title of my talk, which is Academic Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 make 4. Now wait a minute, we just heard a very detailed scientific talk from the scientist, Kevin Ryan. We just heard from the rocket scientist, Bob Bowman. He's not just a scientist, he's a Caltech rocket scientist. So how am I going to defend academic freedom by just saying it's a matter of saying 2 + 2 make 4? Well, that, of course, is referring to a quote from George Orwell, a writer whose works have become more and more relevant during the past several years. And In 1984, he famously wrote, freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. And it seems to me that in the case of 9/11, it is pretty much a matter of 2 + 2 make 4. Before getting to the actual evidence around 9/11 itself, which could go on all night, and I won't do that, I think I'll sketch how some of this applies to the context around 9/11. Because the way we judge events often is heavily influenced by the context that we bring to bear on our judgments. And the history around the beginnings of wars is a very important part of the context that will influence the way we judge the probability of various ideas about what may have happened on 9/11. So, 2 + 2 make 4. I'm going to make this pretty succinct. The two biggest foreign wars that this country fought in the 19th century were launched on lies. I'm referring to the Mexican War of 1847, in which American troops went 200 miles into Mexico, initiated a skirmish, and reports were issued throughout the American media saying that Mexico had invaded and attacked the United States. This provocation led to a war of aggression by the United States against Mexico, in which 2/3 of Mexico's territory was stolen. Okay, in 1898, foreign war number 2 of the 19th century, the battleship Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, killing a couple hundred American sailors, and this launched the Spanish-American War because the Spanish were blamed for blowing up the Maine. Well, the historians are still debating what really happened to the Maine, but one thing that they all admit is that it sure wasn't the Spanish. The Spanish had no reason to invite America to step in there and steal all of their colonial possessions, which is, once again, what we did. Another war of aggression for territorial expansion. So the two biggest foreign wars of the 19th century were launched on lies. Likewise, with the two biggest U.S. foreign wars of the 20th century, I'm of course referring to the two world wars. Our involvement in both world wars was launched on lies. World War I was launched due to really two separate lies. One was the Lusitania, loaded with passengers and armaments and sent into a fleet of German U-boats in the teeth of Germany's insistence that it was going to sink any American ship supplying arms to the British, was, lo and behold, sunk. Okay? Lie number 2, the so-called Zimmermann telegram, was allegedly a telegram from Germany to Mexico involving a conspiracy by Germany and Mexico to invade or attack the United States, bring Mexico into the war and attack the United States. Now, highly improbable, you say, well, yes, but this telegram, which many historians are convinced was forged, helped bring the U.S. into World War I. Okay, big foreign war number 2, of course, is World War II, and the so-called Pearl Harbor revisionist historians have increasingly carried the day in that debate. We now know beyond a reasonable doubt, I would say. I can't speak from absolute authority here. I'm relying to some extent on what I've heard other people say. But clearly the trend is towards those historians who say that President Franklin Roosevelt knew exactly when and where that attack was coming and let it happen, sacrificing more than 2,000 American lives to turn around 80% anti-war public opinion and get the U.S. into World War II. Perhaps for good, valid reasons. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that argument right now. But 2 + 2 make 4. The two biggest foreign wars of the 19th century launched on lies. The two biggest foreign wars of the 20th century launched on lies. Well, that's not where this 2 and 2 make 4 thing stops. Let's move into the post-World War II period. We've got two Pentagon-directed false flag terror programs in the post-World War II period. I'm referring to number 1, Gladio. Let's start with Gladio. Operation Gladio was a program in which the Pentagon trained so-called stay-behind armies in Europe. The idea was if the Russians invaded Western Europe, these so-called stay-behind armies would mount a resistance. That was the cover story. But what they really did over decades was to conduct false flag terror operations against European civilians in order to blame these terrorist attacks on the left and keep left-wing governments out of power in Europe and caused the people of these European democracies to come running behind right-wing fascist governments. And this happened over and over and over. The peak of these horrific Pentagon-directed bombings of European civilians happened during the Nixon administration. Some of the same people we have in power now, by the way, were involved in that. In one, there was a train bombing in Bologna, Italy, that killed, I believe, 125 or so people and wounded hundreds more, directed by our own Pentagon to bring a right-wing government into power in Italy. There were literally dozens of these attacks in many different European countries, as I say, sponsored by the American Pentagon through NATO. And Daniel Ganser has written the book on this. It's called NATO's Secret Armies. Check it out and read it for yourselves and see what you think. Okay. Pentagon-directed false flag program number 2 was the famous Operation Northwoods. Now, I say famous because word has gotten around pretty fast in the last couple of years about this, but it sure wasn't famous when I was going to college. Operation Northwoods was a plan in 1962, signed off on by every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, drafted under the authority of General Lyman Lemnitzer, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs. This plan was for the U.S. military to attack American civilians in terrorist bombings in many American cities, to sink an American ship, killing whom knows how many people, and to stage a fake airliner shootdown in which 200 CIA agents would be loaded onto an airplane under carefully developed aliases as bogus college students, believe it or not, and this plane would cross paths with an unmanned drone which would continue towards Cuba. The plane with the 200 CIA agents would land secretly at a military airbase, and the unmanned plane would be blown up by remote control. The shoot-down would be blamed on Castro, and hundreds of American lives would be mourned in American newspaper front-page headlines. Castro kills 200 American college students, and grieving relatives presumably were going to be brought out, all agents. This was going to happen in 1962, okay? So if they thought they could get away with this in 1962, and indeed the Joint Chiefs were ready to do this in about a month, as soon as they got the president's signature on that document, which they never got, President Kennedy rejected it, they were going to go ahead and do this. It was basically a 9/11 back in 1962. So we got 2 Pentagon-sponsored false flag terror programs that we know about, and we've got 2 illegal wars of aggression launched on lies in this same post-war period. And the wars launched on lies post-World War II I'm referring to are, of course, Vietnam, which was initiated, or the escalation was initiated by the Gulf of Tonkin incident, in which a U.S. ship was supposedly attacked by the North Vietnamese in the Gulf of Tonkin, but it was in fact not attacked. This was a pretext that was carefully developed in order to sell the war. Front-page newspaper headlines all over the country said, U.S. ship attacked by North Vietnamese, and this Gulf of Tonkin bill went through Congress, and that's what brought us full-scale into Vietnam. The second post-war war launched on lies was Gulf War I. Gulf War I was about to get shot down in Congress when the Bush family-connected PR firm, I'm forgetting its name, help me?
Hill and Knowlton.
Hill and Knowlton, thank you. Very good. Brought out a very attractive and personable young woman to testify before Congress. She was supposedly a nurse from a Kuwaiti hospital. And she tearfully described what she saw when she was working there. She claimed that Iraqi soldiers came into this hospital and threw Kuwaiti babies from their incubators on the cold floor to die. Her tearful testimony swayed Congress and swayed American public opinion and made Gulf War I possible. The only problem was that woman was not a nurse. She was the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, and she had been carefully coached by Hill and Knowlton to do the job that she did. So, two more wars launched on lies, 2 Pentagon-sponsored programs of false flag terrorism targeting literally hundreds of civilians. There may have been over 1,000 killed by the Gladio terror operations. 2 plus 2 make 4. The context tells us that we have to think about the possibility that 9/11 could be another act of deception, another act of false flag terrorism. Well, another 2 plus 2 make 4. There were 2 massive rollbacks in civil liberties that happened before 9/11. but were said to be a product of 9/11. One of them you may know about, the Patriot Act. Senator Russ Feingold, my senator from Wisconsin, one of the few relatively honest people in that august body, stood before the University of Wisconsin Law School a couple of years ago, and I was there, and he said it right out. He said, the reason I voted against the Patriot Act was that, I saw it. This was right after 9/11, and I looked at this big, detailed thing, very carefully worked out, and I said, this had to have all been worked up before 9/11 and just brought out afterwards. Well, after that, I handed him some David Griffin books, which he promised to read, about 9/11. Okay, so the Patriot Act was all worked up before 9/11 and then brought out after 9/11 as if it were the result of 9/11, when in fact it predated it. Likewise, with the National Security Agency's secret spying program. Now, the National Security Agency, as I understand it, has some extremely advanced technology that it uses to intercept communications and spy on people all over the world. There have been those who have said over the years that if the National Security Agency were to ever turn its technology against the American people, there would be literally no place to hide. So, there was a scandal just a few years ago. We heard that the National Security Agency has been violating the law in spying on American citizens without these easily obtainable warrants. We found out just last year that it goes deeper than that. The NSA began this program, this Bush program, of spying secretly on American citizens 4 months before 9/11. And yet the claim was that this was necessary because of 9/11, just like the Patriot Act. So we have two massive, unprecedented, unconstitutional rollbacks of our freedom that were worked up and ready to go before 9/11 and brought out after 9/11 and blamed on 9/11. That was the excuse for it. But normally, causes precede effects. Okay? So we had those two rollbacks of civil liberties, plus two illegal wars of aggression that you just heard Colonel Bowman talking about. Those wars were presented to us as if they were a response to 9/11. And yet, both of those wars were planned and ready to go, and in fact, basically set in stone. They were going to happen before 9/11. We've heard from former Treasury Secretary O'Neill that when he came into office with the Bush administration in 2001, January 2001, all they talked about was divvying up Iraq's oil fields in preparation for the invasion and occupation. That the first meeting they had, they presented this Iraq war plan, and Bush said, "Show me a way to get it done," quote unquote. Well, I guess they did. The war in Afghanistan, likewise, we were told that was supposed to be an attempt to go after Osama. It was a response to 9/11. But then, actually, we learned from BBC right after the war had started. Actually, it was right about the time the war was launched. The BBC reported that the Afghanistan war had been planned before 9/11, that mobilizations had happened here in the U.S. and especially in, I think it was Kazakhstan. In the stands, U.S. bases had already mobilized and were preparing for the war in the summer of 2001 before 9/11. Likewise, an ultimatum was delivered to the Taliban at the Berlin conference in, I believe, July 2001, in which the U.S. participants said, we will either give you a carpet of gold or we'll roll out a carpet of bombs. The Taliban rejected this offer, which included setting up a coalition government and giving the U.S. rights to an oil pipeline, or a gas pipeline, rather. And in rejecting that offer, the Taliban sealed its own doom, and that war plan was set in stone in July 2001. So we've got two rollbacks in civil liberties before 9/11, brought out after as if they were caused by 9/11. We've got two illegal wars of aggression set in stone before 9/11 and just put into action after 9/11 as if 9/11 were the cause. 2 + 2 make 4. These are 4 very good reasons to suspect that 9/11 might have been an inside job. And of course, this is before we even get to the actual evidence around 9/11, of which there is so much that if I were to stand here and tell you what little I know about it, and I'm certainly not the leading researcher on this, I'd be here all night. I won't do that, but I will give you a little summary. 2 + 2 make 4. Let's look at the official story of 9/11. We have 2 planes that did way too much damage and 2 planes that did way too little damage. Okay? That makes 4 planes that supposedly crashed, and not one of those crashes was investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board, as all airliner crashes in America are supposed to be. Not one forensic investigation was conducted like the one on TWA 800, where they dredged it up from the bottom of the ocean and put it all back together to figure out what happened to it. Nothing remotely like that happened on any of these crashes. Four airliners that the stories about this don't add up. Now, the 2 planes that did way too much damage, of course, were the 2 that hit the Twin Towers. First, these 2 planes took down 3 skyscrapers. Okay, 2 planes, 3 skyscrapers. This doesn't add up already. Secondly, as we've heard from Kevin Ryan, the Twin Towers that were hit by these planes were built to withstand the impact of planes this size. In fact, the actual kinetic energy of the planes they were designed to take hits from, and some say multiple hits from, would have been roughly equal or perhaps even a little greater than the kinetic energy of the planes that allegedly hit them. So how did these planes do so much damage? How did they cause these buildings to not collapse but explode? How did they cause these buildings to eject giant multi-ton structural steel fragments upward and outward for 500 plus feet and impale these giant, these pieces of steel in neighboring buildings? How did these planes cause these buildings to explode like this roughly an hour after impact and leave tiny human bone fragments all over the rooftops of all the neighboring buildings? How would that happen in just a gravity-driven collapse? How did these plane crashes cause these buildings to collapse into nothing? They didn't just collapse, they disappeared. Normally, when buildings collapse from any cause but controlled demolition, they tip over, and what's left is the whole building. I mean, there's part of it's like a stump sticking up, and the rest is lying on its side. Google it up, look at buildings that have collapsed from earthquake. There aren't any tall buildings that have collapsed from fire, so as Kevin Ryan says, you can't look at those. But if you look at, even if you look at conventional controlled demolitions, what's left is there's a pile. There was less left at the World Trade Center's Twin Towers site than at normal controlled demolitions. There was almost nothing there. These buildings vanished into what? Into clouds of sub 100 micron dust. So these 2 planes somehow caused these buildings to just explode, flinging multi-ton fragments outward. Turn into everything in these buildings, including their concrete and their contents and the people, turn into little tiny bone fragments and mostly just sub 100 micron dust. And these massive pyroclastic dust cloud flows engulfed lower Manhattan, blasting outwards. Pyroclastic dust flows are characteristic of 2 things: volcanic eruptions and major explosions, often nuclear explosions. It's almost inconceivable that gravitational energy in a building collapse could generate that kind of cloud flow. How did these planes do that? How did these planes leave all this molten metal? How did they create molten metal pouring down the outside of the buildings that you just saw? How did they create these pools of molten steel in the rubble that were still dripping considerably after the attacks? They were still red hot a month after the event. How did these 2 planes do that? Well, they did too much damage. That's all we can say. We also had 2 planes that did too little damage. The plane that hit the Pentagon appears to have somehow managed to avoid scratching the lawn of the Pentagon and entering at only the first floor and making a hole that really does, let's face it, it seems a little small for the size of the plane. And most obviously, where the engines were, there's no damage that would indicate the engines hit there. There is this perfectly round hole in the inner, like the C ring of the Pentagon. Now, how these planes did that is another question. Perhaps the miracle of the tiny damage done by this multi-ton passenger airliner could partly be solved if we look at the context of Flight 77 that supposedly hit the Pentagon. We're told that it took off at Newark Airport, 5 minutes from the World Trade Center, and instead of just flying into the World Trade Center, which is what any sensible terrorist would do to make sure you don't get intercepted by the fighter pilots, like Bob, these brilliant terrorists who defeated our air defenses took Flight 77 all the way across the country and then turned it around thinking that they were going to hit the Pentagon almost an hour and a half after multiple signs of hijackings had already been noticed by the military and air traffic control. So we're told that these brilliant idiot terrorists flew all the way to Ohio, or let the plane get to Ohio, and then took it over there and put a guy named Hanny Hanger behind the controls. Now, Hanny Hanger was a flight school flunk-out who wasn't trusted to solo in a Cessna. And yet, we're told that he'd never been in any of these airliners. He took over this airliner and flew it back to Washington at 30,000 feet. This is to hit the Pentagon, an hour and a half after the hijacking start. Still no fighter pilots around. And then he did this amazing stunt maneuver. Instead of just diving into the Pentagon and killing thousands of people, probably he would normally aim at the wing where Rumsfeld and the top brass were. He did an amazing stunt maneuver, dropping 2,000 or 8,000 feet in 2+ minutes, and came in at ground level on the opposite side from his approach in order to skim the ground at an altitude that no real 757 could fly at because of aerodynamic factors, turbulence beneath the plane. He came in low enough to clip power lines or telephone poles and not leave a scratch on the lawn, but put this little hole in only the first floor of the Pentagon. This Hanny Hanger was quite a guy. What he did manage to take out was all the Pentagon auditors and some Office of Naval Intelligence people. The Pentagon auditors and accountants, 20 of them were killed, and their records were destroyed. They were hot on the trail of $2.3 trillion missing from the Pentagon that Donald Rumsfeld had announced was missing one day before that on September 10th, 2001. Now, $2.3 trillion is a lot of money to go missing. That's about 7 times our annual military budget, and it's a significant fraction of our GNP. It was bizarre when Rumsfeld announced $2.3 trillion missing on a Monday, because you don't announce bad news on a Monday because that gives it all week to build. You announce it on a Friday and hope something big happens over the weekend. Well, it's as if he knew something big was going to happen on Tuesday, which it did, and everybody forgot all about that $2.3 trillion, and those 20 accountants were killed. The accounting office was wiped out, and the ONI, which has been, according to intelligence sources I've talked to, it's been a thorn in the side of the Bush crime family for years, also took a big hit on that side of the Pentagon. So anyway, that plane, it did do some serious damage. It just didn't do anything like the damage that one would expect, nor did it come anywhere near matching the planes that hit the towers. The other plane that did way too little damage is Flight 93. Now, we're told that heroic passengers rebelled against these evil, dastardly hijackers and took over, or stormed the cockpit and caused this plane to crash, thereby saving the people where the targets were. That's the official story. Yet, as Colonel Bowman tells us, there was debris from an aircraft, presumably this one, over many square miles, and there was a hole. And the government tells us that this plane was taken down, it kind of came down and just crashed like this, and went into a hole. Now, the people who saw that hole and photographed that hole, what it is it's a 15-foot hole in the ground, a little bit of scrap metal inside, and there's no plane. What happened to it? They tell us that the plane buried itself. The whole plane buried itself in the ground, including the tail section. The tail section didn't break off. The wings didn't break off. The whole thing just went into the ground and disappeared, buried beneath the ground into a 15-foot hole, and they tell us that the characteristics of the ground at that particular place made this possible. Well, I'd say that's too little damage. So we have 2 + 2 make 4, 2 planes that did way too much damage, including taking down Building 7, which wasn't hit by either of them, but just boom, came down in 7 seconds at free fall speed in an obvious controlled demolition, to which the landlord, the overinsured landlord of 6 weeks, confessed on national television. That's too much damage for those 2 planes. And the other 2 did way too little. 2 + 2 make 4, for good reasons to reopen this investigation and try and find out why these people have the audacity to tell us lies of this outrageous size. Well, I have a few more things to say, but actually I think one of the most important parts of tonight's event would be a Q&A session. But before I get to that, let me just say that the academic freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 make 4. That means that we have the freedom as teachers in our nation's colleges and universities to not only investigate things in our fields of expertise, just as an Arabist, I have the right to say, I'm interested in studying Osama bin Laden and his writings and his tapes, his alleged videotapes. as Bruce Lawrence has of Duke University. He's our leading bin Laden expert. He tells us bin Laden's been dead for a long time and all the tapes we're getting are phony. Structural engineers have the right to look at these collapses or demolitions. Aerodynamics experts have the right to look at the stories of the alleged flight path of Flight 77 that supposedly hit the Pentagon, if they can do that without collapsing in the ground in pained laughter. People in academia have the right to study what they want to, and they are judged by members of their discipline and their department. They are not threatened or judged or fired by politicians. They are not threatened by administration members at their university. Universities are supposed to be self-governing institutions, and it's the department and the discipline that decides if what you're doing passes muster of that discipline. So they have that right, but more importantly, I would say, is we all have the right, even college teachers, we have the right to say that 2 + 2 make 4 in public. And I was threatened, and I was urged to resign. My university was told to fire me, not because of anything I was doing in my professional capacity as a university instructor, but because I had dared to speak my mind and to state my own privately held political opinion on a radio show. That was it. It had nothing to do with my capacity to do my job. And when the university did a background investigation, they discovered that I was a very competent teacher. They looked over my plans for the coming semester and said, this is a perfectly good way to teach an Intro to Islam course. You're only spending 1 to 15 weeks on the War on Terror, and you're bringing in multiple perspectives, including the ones you don't agree with. You're doing your job fine. So they kept me on. And yet, there's still this idea out there that a college teacher can, be threatened or fired by politicians and government officials, or even administration officials, if they speak words privately, or, their own private, they express their private beliefs that are deemed to be politically incorrect. And I think we all have the freedom in this country to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If we don't have any freedom at all. And I'd like to urge all of you to say 2 + 2 make 4 on 9/11, get in the face of the so-called experts and the poo-pooers and the deniers and the people who are putting up smoke screens, and call them on these things. It's not that complicated. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or any kind of scientist. What we need in this country is a populist movement of ordinary people who stand up and say 2 + 2 make 4. And I hope that all of you will consider doing that by getting involved with the great people who organize this event, getting a hold of these DVDs that are being offered for free, and if you think that they're valuable, you can copy them and spread them around. If you want to get involved big time, you can do it through 911dvdproject.com, which will give you vast amounts and numbers of different DVDs at cost. You can call into your local talk radio shows and say, look, 9/11 is the most important historic event of the 21st century. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of it, and there's obviously a cover-up, as Colonel Bowman said. Whatever you think really happened or didn't happen, we need to clarify the most important historical event of the 20th century. You can do that. They can't censor you on talk radio. You can write to the newspapers, and more and more the media is getting open to these things, and they might print your letters, as they printed some of mine and many others. There's a whole lot you can do. I'm not going to stand up here and take all your time. So let's move on to the Q&A. But thanks for coming out to hear controversial opinions, and I hope it'll change your life, as this information changed mine.
Kevin Barrett. All right, before we go to our question and answer period, I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of my group. We're very honored that we have our guests here tonight to be doing this, but after they leave tomorrow, we need to not let this event exist in isolation. We've spent hours now explaining why this issue is so important, and it's great that we're getting out information on the internet, and it's great that we're booking speakers who can continue to come in and discredit the official theory. We need to keep doing that and waking up more people. And we also need to investigate these matters further than what we can get to in 3 hours. So I encourage everybody to visit a2planet.com, and even as of tomorrow, we will have an interview posted with Kevin Barrett, who recorded earlier today, where we can start to explore these deeper issues. We also have a message board that it's a real simple process to register, and you can post questions on any forum, and we will be planning to have some more events in the future. So I encourage you all to do that, and thank you all for coming. Now I got some questions for various ones. Most of them are to nobody in particular. Some of them are to Barrett, and there's a few to Ryan. There's one here this is for you? No. Okay. Oh. All right, well, I'll sort that one out. All right, the first question is I'm going to refer this to Barrett, although it's for everybody. The commenter writes that, and they thank everyone that came tonight for their great minds, and they would like some advice for how to network together and take more action. And I guess that kind of picks up right where I just was talking about. Is there any recommendations you can give us for how to network and move this movement forward?
Well, people here in Ann Arbor can go to Adam's website. Brett, you remind us again?
a2planet.com. It's on this podium.
Right, a2planet.com. That's a good place to start, is locally. I think if you actually get to know people and you'll meet them and get to know their faces and talk to them, it's really better than using the internet. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. If you're totally sitting around the internet all day, it gets old real fast. So you need to get a local group of people together and meet once a month or something, talk about what's going on, host DVD screenings, and as I said, keep the pressure on the media. Call in talk radio, write letters to the editor. Support 9/11 Truth candidates like Bob Bowman in any way you can, and think about taking it to the next level and confronting politicians in the next round of elections, getting in their faces on this issue. Those are just some of the things to do, but the first thing is to get to know the people in your community who are working on this issue, and we have some great people here in Ann Arbor.
Would you guys like to add anything before I move to the next question? All right, then this next one, I guess, is for Kevin Ryan. Someone asked, when would it have been possible to plant explosives? Is that one working?
There we go.
Careful.
Okay.
You are now.
Well, it's a tricky situation trying to provide the alternative theory in detail, right? Everybody wants another outrageous conspiracy theory. They want something sensational to replace what we've been given. So certainly I've talked about the demolition hypothesis. So I would, if I was interested in explaining exactly how it was done, I would look at a couple of things. First, there are testimonies of people who worked in the buildings, that the buildings were powered down in the weeks prior to September 11th, and that there were opportunities, particularly with Marvin Bush being associated and Wirt Walker, George W. Bush's cousin, being the CEO of the security company in charge of the World Trade Center. There were opportunities for doing this sort of thing. But I'm personally interested in also the construction upgrades that were going on in the buildings for the 2 years prior to 9/11. What kind of things were going on the very floors of impact and failure where the construction upgrades were happening. I think that those things are interesting, but I can't say specifically what explosives were used. There is evidence now that the thermite reaction was involved. Very likely there were other types of explosives involved, but the detail of it will have to wait for another investigation by the appropriate and qualified individuals.
Thank you. And this next question, this is to anybody. I'm going to address it to Barrett. I remember hearing this too. It said, I've read somewhere that a maid of Marvin Bush was found dead, pinned to a wall by a car or a limo on Bush's property. If so, why hasn't this been investigated further?
Well, actually, that's true. The best source on that I know of is a book by Wayne Madsen, M-A-D-S-E-N. It's called Jaded Tasks. And Wayne Madsen is a former employee of the National Security Agency, which is America's biggest intelligence agency. It's 10 times bigger in budget and personnel than the CIA, and yet it was top secret. It was no such agency until about 1990. You say the government can't keep a secret. They kept the existence of the biggest intelligence agency that we have completely secret. Nobody knew about it, except in whispers, until about 1990. Anyway, Wayne Madsen is a former employee and whistleblower. He wrote this book, Jaded Tasks, and he takes on this case of Marvin Bush's maid killed by being pinned by a car, and the police just completely stayed away from the whole thing.
And This is another general question. I'll direct this to Barrett, I think, because it's something he might be interested in. Is there any information or evidence as to what happened to the passengers from flights 77 and 93? And did FEMA or the CIA help get rid of them?
Well, I don't know. For Flight 93, there's a great book out by a guy named Rowland, Rowland. With, as in so many of these things, we know what didn't happen. We know that the official story of Flight 93 doesn't make any sense. It's almost certain that it was shot down, I would say. Beyond that, we don't really know very much. There are questions around the cell phone calls. There are questions around so many facets of the story of Flight 93, including, the official story that it never was even noticed as being hijacked, and it was never, trailed by fighter jets or anything. And it crashed or was shot down at 10:06. That's virtually 2 hours after the whole thing started, because it was back at 8:15 that they had, the signs of multiple signs of hijackings first became apparent. So this official story that they were so dropped the ball, they didn't even know what was going on with Flight 93 until it crashed due to the heroic passengers, has been thoroughly disproven. I don't think we know really what did happen, but read Rowland on that. As for Flight 77 and its passengers, frankly, I have no idea what could have happened. In some ways, it's pointless to speculate, but certainly you can imagine things that might have happened, such as complicit passengers being secretly unloaded somewhere and non-complicit ones being killed. If there was a plane switch, like the one envisioned in Operation Northwoods, that's not inconceivable. It certainly is extremely interesting that the one and only cell phone call that allegedly came through from Flight 77 happened to come from the wife of the Bush crime family's top legal fixer, their biggest lawyer, Ted Olson, who argued Bush into office in 2000, in the coup d'etat in 2000, the Supreme coup. So Ted Olson tells us that his wife, Barbara, a Bushite extremist TV personality, somehow got through to him on a cell phone from Flight 77, and he's told 3 or 4 contradictory stories about this alleged phone call. Nobody's ever produced any records to show that it ever happened, and it certainly is odd that the one call supposedly came from Barbara. But, I don't have any answers on what actually may have happened with Flight 77. As we academics always say, more research is necessary. Well, who knows? I mean, as I said, it's possible. It's always possible that complicit passengers could have been unloaded and, given a cushy secret job somewhere, and non-complicit ones could have been killed.
This next question is for Dr. Bowman. This is interesting. Do you think the government is withholding the technology developed by Nikola Tesla?
I actually get asked this one a lot. The question is about Tesla's work of many, many decades ago into various electromagnetic forces and fields. Associated with that is the government's HAARP program, HAARP, High Altitude Auroral Research Program up in Alaska, where they project enormous amounts of energy into the upper atmosphere, distort the troposphere, and supposedly can disrupt communications and affect weather around the world and stuff like that. There are people who think that exotic Tesla weapons were used from space against the World Trade Centers. I personally, as somebody who's been involved in the development of space weapons, think that that's highly unlikely, but I have no personal knowledge one way or the other.
This is a good one for Dr. Barrett. Why was FEMA in New York on September 10th?
Well, that's an interesting question. I taught a folklore class a year and a half ago, and I taught 9/11 conspiracy theories in that class. This was a whole year before this controversial Islam class that I got in trouble for this past fall. And at that, the way I worked this in was I was teaching a class in the folktale, and so we looked at rumors, legends, and conspiracy theories as one genre of the folktale. And we looked at, we compared debunkings to conspiracy theories in various, some of these 9/11 areas, and one of them was the conspiracy theory. Snopes.com, which is a debunking site, tells us that the conspiracy theorists think that FEMA came to New York on September 10th, and they base this on a remark by a FEMA guy who was involved in this, which we think, which was clearly just a slip of the tongue. He just got the date wrong. So that's the Snopes debunking. But then I have the students look at the conspiracy theory, which is linked to an article in New York Magazine, which describes in great detail, based on interviews with lots of participants, this massive Tripod 2 biological warfare exercise that was scheduled for September 12th, I believe it was. And FEMA was in town on the 10th to gear up for this huge set of biowar exercises that involved more than 1,000 off-duty New York police and fire people and other New Yorkers who were hired to play the roles of victims of a massive bioterror attack. It was a gigantic set of exercises, biggest thing around. FEMA was totally brought to New York and in place on September 10th, and they were all ready to go when 9/11 happened, as if they knew something was coming. Another case of exercises going live, just like these multiple war games of mock hijackings were happening as the real hijackings, or supposedly real hijackings, were happening on 9/11.
This next question I think everybody should have a chance to answer. How can we as individuals help progress impeachment and indictments, and how can we keep from being labeled enemy combatants and imprisoned without habeas corpus? Would anyone like to go first? Or?
Well, how you can further the impeachment and further the possibility of investigations and whatnot is to support those of us who are trying to work on this. In particular, I'm founding an organization called the Patriots, and I'm recruiting current members of Congress into a Patriot caucus from both political parties who will stand up for the Constitution, the truth, and the people. And part of the thing of the truth, of course, is 9/11. And so if you've already been told you can get the DVDs and distribute them yourself, talk to people. I actually made a couple of converts today on the way here in the airport in Orlando waiting for the plane. I was quietly practicing my speech, and people started coming around and, can I sit right down next to you, and looking over my shoulder at my notes and listening to what I was saying, and it led to conversations which then lasted all the way through the flight to Detroit. And I wound up giving out cards and so forth. Now, Mike has my luggage here somewhere, and in there I've got nice, pretty, slick business cards that you can call me at home or check my website or any of that stuff. Get involved personally, and then get involved in supporting those of us who are doing this pretty much full time. And that would be my recommendation.
Would you like to add anything?
Well, speak out. Freedom it doesn't come free. Use it or lose it. And we're still privileged to be able to say these things in this country. There are many parts of the world where, if there were anything equivalent to 9/11, which really there hasn't been, but similar extreme crimes by leaders, really can't be talked about this openly. I lived in Morocco for a year, and although speech was freeing up under the new king there's still a rule that you can only go so far in criticizing the king. And here, we're calling. I'm willing to stand up and call the president and the vice president traitors, mass murderers, and complicit in the 9/11 acts of high treason. And I've done that in public repeatedly on nationwide TV and radio. It's pretty extraordinary that we can still do that in this country. It shows that we have a tradition of freedom that is worth preserving, and those of us who are exercising it may be a minority, but we need to keep at it. And so I invite all of you to speak out in whatever forums that you can find.
All right, this next question, the person who wrote the question actually went on to answer it on their own card, but I just thought it'd be funny to say. They wrote, why has Nancy Pelosi stated that she will not look into the impeachment of George Bush? And then they answer the question, because she's a Zionist bought up by the elite that rule the world, 13 bloodlines including Rothschilds, Rockefellers, etc. They're the ones who started the communist and the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, World War II, the U.S. Revolution, and the Civil War. Now the elite has terrorism and is, instead of communism, to make war, to make money, and to destroy the population and finally make the world government. And I guess they answer their own question, but if any of you guys would like
that question answers itself.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment on that.
Sure.
I think perhaps that's being a little too hard on Nancy Pelosi. You have to understand that her statement made before the election that impeachment was off the table was one that I think she almost had to make, because if Bush and Cheney are impeached, she becomes the President of the United States. And for her to appear to be in any way pushing impeachment would seem to be extremely self-serving. You also have to understand that it is not totally within her power to keep impeachment off the table. And if it is brought up by others and so forth, she doesn't have to push it. I wouldn't take those statements too seriously, because I think there is still a chance that impeachment can happen if we, the people, demand it, and we can get our representatives moving on it. If they feel that it is in their own interest to do this, then it will happen. But again, we have to be very clear, I think, because even if we're absolutely convinced that 9/11 was an inside job, that does not necessarily mean that George W. Bush was in on it. As a matter of fact, a lot of his actions immediately on that day down in Florida and flying around the country would seem to give one the idea that he was taken by surprise by this and was threatened by it as well. So we shouldn't prejudge the result of a new investigation which we're demanding and which hasn't taken place yet. But like I explained earlier, we already have sufficient evidence of impeachable offenses with regard to exploiting 9/11 for the conduct of the wars against Afghanistan and Iraq. And we should go forward on that basis. We shouldn't hang our hat on their guilt for 9/11. We should wait until the investigation is done before clearing that. But we can go ahead with impeachment anyway on other grounds.
All right, this next card actually doesn't have a question on it, but maybe you can probably make one up from the premise. It says, after the Kennedy assassination, there were dozens of people who mysteriously died, meaning witnesses, I believe. But after 9/11, we haven't heard about anybody who may have been involved. There must have been more people involved in this. So, anyone care to comment on that remark?
You know, as far as the number of people involved, some have said, those with knowledge of covert operations have said that it wouldn't take all that many people, not as many as you think, that is, people who would be fully, knowingly complicit in these acts. A fairly small number of people in high positions can pull levers causing those below them to act complicit, but without knowledge of why they're doing what they're doing. Now, we have had lots of whistleblowers on 9/11. People say why there are no whistleblowers. We've had tons of whistleblowers, but they've all been, clearly not knowingly complicit people. There are people who knew what was coming beforehand and tried to stop it. There are a number of them. A whole team of FBI agents went to David Shippers, who was a Republican who led Bill Clinton's impeachment prosecution, and who says that this team of FBI agents came to him before 9/11 and said they knew that there were attacks in lower Manhattan scheduled for 9/11. They were trying to stop them, and their superiors had threatened them and silenced them. David Shippers then went to his Republican colleagues, including he tried to get through to Ashcroft, and he was repeatedly rebuffed. So there were. We don't know the names of these FBI people, but we know the name of Colleen Rowley, a whistleblower who tells us that the Minneapolis FBI people were all over Moussaoi's laptop, and they tried more than 70 times to get a routine warrant to seize and look at Moussaoi's laptop. Had they done that, it probably would have derailed 9/11. And yet they were stymied 70 times, 70 requests. These people were going to headquarters and saying, we think this guy's going to fly a plane into the World Trade Center. And this is just in the summer before 9/11. And Dave Frasca, the head of the radical fundamentalism unit of the FBI, repeatedly stymied these requests. So somebody like Frasca could control what came through the system from large numbers of FBI agents on the ground. And that's just an example of how a relatively small number of key people in high places could be knowingly complicit, and all these other people, including the many, many, many whistleblowers who've come forward, were unknowingly complicit.
All right, this next question I have is for Kevin Ryan. The person writes, engineering models are commonly used to test structures. In the last 5 years, why hasn't anybody or any organization spent the money and resources to build replica World Trade Towers and show that even 5 years of continual jet fuel fires would not cause global collapse?
Well, building a full-scale model of the World Trade Center towers would be quite a task, I would say. There is another building in Oklahoma City that was designed the same way by the same architects, and it's about half the size. So I think it is a good idea. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars on these 9/11 wars and really sacrificed pretty much everything. It seems reasonable for us to say, okay, we've got a building designed the same way. Let's evacuate it. Let's fly a plane into it. Seems reasonable. Why not? Well, most of the investigations over the last few years, have been kind of dragging us along with the promise of a story that would explain things. And most people have gone along with that. But now, I think there is enough evidence that we don't really need a model to explain whether or not these buildings could have collapsed from a plane hitting them. We know, because the people who have tried to explain fire-induced collapse have failed. They've tried multiple times, given us multiple stories, and they've all been false. Believe me, if they could have given us some explanation, they really would have, and we would understand it right now, but they have failed multiple times.
Thank you. This next question asks, and it's not addressed to anyone in particular, it's kind of one of those questions I think maybe Kevin Barrett would like to hear. Why did we hear for weeks that 5,000 people died in the Twin Towers? Then the war in Afghanistan started, and all of a sudden there were only 3,000 dead. Were 3,000 dead not enough to get the public to go to war, but 5,000 were?
Well, I don't know about that, but it is. I think the number of casualties is kind of interesting. In light of the vast amount of planning that envisioned a new Pearl Harbor, we have, of course, the PNAC document calling for a new Pearl Harbor, issued 1 year before 9/11, and PNAC, of course, Project for a New American Century, involved Cheney, Rumsfeld, and the other key Bush foreign policy people. But what most people don't know yet is that the military has been doing psychological experiments for years on the so-called Pearl Harbor effect. How was it that this event at Pearl Harbor was able to turn 80% anti-war public opinion immediately all the way around and make the whole nation almost unanimous in marching off to war? Why did Americans still dislike Japanese people in various ways decades after Pearl Harbor? So all sorts of studies and focus groups were commissioned by our military to study this so-called Pearl Harbor effect. effect. And so it seems to me that, well, some of these are actually discussed by Douglas Rushkoff, who's a leading communications theorist at New York University. His book, Coercion, is a terrific look at mind control and propaganda, very relevant to 9/11. And he points out that these focus groups on Pearl Harbor and these Pearl Harbor effect projects that the military did were a major thing, including in the 1990s. So it seems to me that getting, the number of people killed at the World Trade Center being roughly equivalent to the number who died at Pearl Harbor may not be a coincidence. And indeed, the tapes that played over and over in the South Tower saying, stay at your desk, everything's going to be okay. There were tapes telling people to stay there and not to leave the buildings. And some victims' families have speculated that these may have been there to keep the casualty numbers up high enough.
All right, this next question is, I can actually do this one. What if it becomes clear to the majority of Americans that a series of crimes were committed and the government and media does nothing or little about it? Well, here we are. Next question, this is a good one. Please expound, this is directed in general, but please expound on the arrogance of the administration and those behind it. Are they far behind in their strategy? How surprised and affected by the 9/11 truth movement besides and independently of the peace movement and the House and Senate? This was written down, but I think you see where the question is going. It's basically, do you think the administration is taken totally by surprise by this, or do you think this is all calculated in advance, or anybody have an opinion?
Opinions are only worth so much, but I would say the evidence indicates that the Bush administration has, as Dr. Bowman has pointed out, covered up the facts of 9/11. So whether or not they were surprised or involved is one thing. The crimes of 9/11 are actually, I think, overwhelmed by the crimes of the cover-up about what happened on 9/11, and we do know that they were involved in that cover-up. So the greater crime is really what we should be going after right now, I think. The deaths have been far greater, and the damage to our country has been far greater. So whether they knew exactly what happened or were surprised is really immaterial when we know they have done a lot to cover up the crimes.
Would you like to add anything, or should I move on?
I don't think that Cheney was surprised, but I'll leave it at that.
All right, this is another question I guess could go to anybody. What role do you surmise did Osama bin Laden actually play in the events of 9/11? Anyone care to reckon? Or Bowman, would you like to explain why it's not that important?
Well, this is another question where the answer is we just don't know. I also often say the truth about 9/11 is that we don't know the truth about 9/11, and we should. It is possible that bin Laden was involved. If he was involved, he could have been involved as a hater of the United States, as someone who was punishing the United States for continuing to occupy the holy land of Saudi Arabia, the home of Mecca, long after the first Gulf War, becoming a permanent occupation. On the other hand, it's possible that he was involved as a CIA operative, because he was on the CIA payroll continually, as far as our evidence shows, right up through the time of 9/11. The third possibility is that he was involved as a patsy, that he was sort of suckered into doing this. And of course, the fourth possibility is that he wasn't involved at all and perhaps has been dead for some time before 9/11, and that the tapes we've seen of him have all been by imposters. We know that the confession videotape was done by an actor whose nose is about an inch shorter than the real Osama bin Laden's, who had quite a massive nose. So we don't know the answer to these things. And it's similarly with the 19 Arab hijackers. We really don't know if they really existed. We don't know if they were really on those planes or not. And if they were on those planes, were they on those planes to fly them into the World Trade Center and other targets, or because they were employed by the CIA, trained by the CIA and by the military, at least several of them were they patsies? Were they on those planes thinking that they were engaging in an anti-terrorist exercise, that they were pulsing the system, and found themselves on aircraft that were flown into those targets by remote control? Now, all those things are possible, and we simply don't know the answers. That's precisely why we need a new investigation, is because we don't know the truth, and there are too many possibilities for us to pin it down and say, I know this happened.
Thank you. And these two questions are pretty similar. I'm just going to do them both at once because they're both kind of what can be done questions. And one of them asks specifically about these FEMA internment camps, which there are videos about on Google, and there's pictures and locations. The other one is about how it can be done that we can get the FBI to release the tapes of the Pentagon crash. So I guess they're kind of the same question with a different premise, but we kind of got into that a little bit. Would you like to say anything more about that, or would anybody else? About how we can get this evidence released? Would anyone like to talk about the FEMA camps?
I don't know anything about the camps other than I do know that there's a huge contract out, I believe it's Halliburton, that's building secret detention centers around the country, ostensibly for internment of illegal immigrants. But of course they could be used for any purpose, as far as we know. They're built for families, not just individuals as well. So I've seen pictures of those myself. As far as how we can get the FBI or other organizations like NIST to release all the information that they're holding from us, the primary method is through FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. Sometimes they'll come back and they'll say, well, in order to do this, we'll need $13,000, from you in order to copy all these documents. I've heard that. But as far as the Pentagon tapes go, I believe there already is Freedom of Information Act requests from Judicial Watch for all those tapes.
They released a tape app finally, but the tape was, clearly edited because it didn't show any plane in it, so it didn't really help at all.
Right. As far as I'm concerned, if they're going to go to the extent that they did to seize those documents and recordings and hold them for so long, it's very unlikely they're going to release something that will implicate the government or themselves in part of the crime. But maybe someone else has something to say.
All I could add about the FEMA camps is if you look at, it's actually a KBR created the camps, and there's a source on Market Watch, but if you just type in FEMA camps, all this stuff comes up, or type in FEMA KBR and in these camps, and they say they're, in case there's any kind of emergency influx of immigrants, which you can't really imagine happening when our economy is doing what it's doing, but they also say it could be used for any other national crisis, so that could presumably be anything that the government would like it to be, so quite something to worry about.
Oh, and just in case there's confusion, KBR, the contractor for those camps, is Kellogg Brown and Root, which is a subsidiary of Halliburton.
This question is for anybody who might be able to answer it. What Congress critter is closest to initiating impeachment inquiries? Anyone in particular, you think? I know Cynthia McKinney filed one right before she left, but that's as far as I know. Does anybody else think there's any particular congressman of preference?
Impeachment?
Yeah.
Well, John Conyers was the one in the forefront of it. He has, at least temporarily, backed off from it, probably at the request of Nancy Pelosi for the reasons I discussed before. But I think he is still amenable to the idea, and he's one that we should keep in mind. And again, the people that I'm recruiting to be the heart of the Patriot Caucus are Republican Ron Paul and Democrat Dennis Kucinich. And it's my hope that they can be encouraged not only to support impeachment, but to support the new investigations that I outlined earlier.
Here's another question I suppose anybody could answer. Maybe Kevin Barrett would like to. What about the fact that none of the 19 hijackers' names are on the plane's manifests?
Well, yeah, that's another piece of evidence that the official story about these hijackers is false. I got to talk to Senator Barbara Boxer about this last year. She was on Wisconsin Public Radio, and I called in. I urge you to call into the radio when you can. And this turned out really interestingly because at that time, Congressman Kurt Weldon was calling for an investigation of what our intelligence agencies knew and when they knew it about these 19 alleged hijackers. And so I got on the phone to Barbara Boxer and said, well, Senator Boxer, as you may know, these alleged 19 hijackers trained at secure U.S. military facilities, Pensacola Naval Air Station and Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. They pretended to take flying lessons that in some cases they didn't need at CIA drug import airstrips disguised as flight schools. They were flight schools in name only. So given this and given the revelations about the Able Danger program, which had earmarked Atta and others as terrorists in 2000, and the Able Danger people were ordered to forget that they'd ever seen these guys. They were ordered to put stickers over the face of Muhammad Atta and forget they'd ever seen him. Given these facts, do you support Congressman Weldon's call for a new investigation about these so-called hijackers? Well, you'd think that a U.S. senator would say, you're crazy. But no, she said, that isn't the way the 9/11 Commission told it, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. She said, we need the truth about these things, and I support finding the truth, but even though we absolutely need this, my first priority is to end the war in Iraq. So I thought that was a pretty interesting response from Senator Boxer, suggesting that she knows a lot more than she's usually making public. And I think that the information about these alleged 19 hijackers makes it absolutely clear that the official story about them is utterly false. They were not devout Muslims, much less fanatical fundamentalists. They were party animals, probably intelligence agents. The two flight schools in Florida, the key ones where most of them were supposedly taking flying lessons, had been taken over by these two Dutch guys with very shady backgrounds suggesting international organized crime and drug smuggling and intelligence agency connections. About a year before 9/11, they shut down as real flight schools, as the people who worked there knew full well, and basically they trained Arabs to pretend to learn to fly, and they brought in drugs. And the biggest heroin drug bust in Central Florida history happened at one of these airstrips where Muhammad Atta was supposedly learning to fly. The owner of the plane, Wally Hilliard, another dubious individual who financed these airstrips when they were bought up and turned into drug airstrips, it was his plane that the DEA seized full of heroin, and they just let it go. They didn't prosecute him, and I think they even gave his plane back. Perhaps they didn't know that it was a CIA-protected operation. In any case, the stories we're given about these hijackers are utterly at variance with the facts, which point very, very clearly towards these hijackers or alleged hijackers having been set up as patsies by forces within our own military intelligence apparatus, and very corrupt forces at that.
All right, there's going to be, I've got one question, then we've got one last question. My question, however, and I'll direct this to anyone who would care to field, although I think maybe Kevin Barrett would like to. There's quite a remarkable amount of evidence out there that connects Israel to the September 11th attacks, including 4 Israeli intelligence agents who were arrested on the day, witnessed dancing and cheering while the Twin Towers collapsed. Additionally, 2 of the airports, Logan and Newark, were owned, and their security was serviced by the Huntley Corporation, a wholly owned subsidiary of ICTS, which is an Israeli company. And the neocon agenda appears to be perfectly in line with the Israeli agenda. So my question is, do you see this as, is this a confluence of influence, or is there a dominating force behind it, or is there a reason why it's difficult to assess one way or the other?
Well, personally, I'm not one of the people who lead off by talking about possible Israeli involvement in 9/11, just because there's so much evidence of American involvement, right up to the Oval, the White House, with Cheney in particular. There's so much evidence that Cheney was in command in the White House bunker around 9/15, as Clark tells us, as Mineta tells us. And yet the 9/11 Commission covered that up and said he didn't get there until after 10. It's clear that Bush wasn't acting as commander-in-chief in that school in Florida. He was just reading about pet goats and lollygagging the whole time, whereas Cheney was, in fact, acting as commander-in-chief in a preordained shift of commander-in-chief powers, which is itself unconstitutional and grounds for prosecutions for treason. Given all of this evidence pointing towards the U.S. High Command, personally, I don't think it's useful to be pointing fingers at these foreign intelligence agencies that may have had involvement also, and in some cases very heavy involvement, including the Pakistani ISI, the Saudi intelligence, and Mossad, all of which may have worked together in some way. Who was doing what? It would have been highly compartmentalized. Wayne Madsen, the former NSA guy, says that he's now convinced that it was a heavily compartmentalized covert operation involving multiple intelligence agencies. Michael Andrade, a leading scholar of spies, has said he's going to be issuing his report shortly. He studying these people firsthand. He says that 5 intelligence agencies were involved in the 9/11 compartmentalized covert operation. So even though I'm a Muslim, I'm an anti-Zionist, I don't find it useful to be pointing exclusively at Israel in this matter when there are so many other indications pointing in other directions, and the people who do so obsessively and often in a kind of a nasty way that smacks of prejudice are really not doing the 9/11 truth movement any favors.
Would you like to go on? Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that too. And I come from a little bit different perspective. My father was half Jewish. I have many living Jewish relatives. I have members of my advisory board who are Israeli professors. I've been there a number of times, lived on a kibbutz briefly. So I'm not anti-Semitic, and I am really turned off by some of the folks in the 9/11 truth movement who are obsessed, seemingly, with Israel and its involvement. However, I would like to point out that the neocons, Wolfowitz, Libby, Pearl, the same folks who wrote the PNAC document outlining their proposed foreign and military policy for the United States. These very same people also wrote a secret document, proposed foreign and military policy for the government of Israel under Benjamin Netanyahu. I am very much opposed to many actions of the Likud government of Israel with respect to the Palestinians, with respect to their threats against Iran, and their possible involvement with 9/11. I must insist, however, that objecting to specific policies of the government of Israel under a specific administration is no more anti-Semitic than is criticizing specific policies of the U.S. government under the Bush administration being anti-American.
All right, and we're down to our last card tonight, and we're just about out of time, so I saved the longest one for last, but I'll try to briefen it a little bit. It says, isn't 9/11, and then this goes on relating to Pearl Harbor and Oklahoma City, but basically, isn't this related to the attack on our common law and internet and sovereignty as private individual citizens? And then I really can't read this entire thing, but it does mention the Rothschilds and the banks and Washington, D.C., and the gold ingots and the American financiers and does this have to do with all that stuff with the erosion of common law and with this warped new system that they're sort of imposing on us? Would anybody like to kind of get into that? Oh, no, here's a card. I can only
Okay,
decide
one
for
more
some.
time, I'll try. If there are elements, rogue elements in the United States involved, it is possible that some of those elements are related to the elites, the Bilderbergers, the Rothschilds, the Trilateral Commission under David Rockefeller, all of the folks who have directed both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, ever since John F. Kennedy. However, there is growing evidence that these elites, the real big money people who more or less run the world, are extremely displeased with George W. Bush and the way his policies are going. And the trilateralists, David Gergen, for example, you see on TV a lot, are increasingly speaking out against Bush and his policies. It seems that though originally taking office with their blessing, he and his neocon buddies, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Libby Pearl, etc., have strayed from the path that they would like. I would rather doubt that these big money elites were behind 9/11. I don't know, but my guess is that that would not be their style, and that if elements of the Bush administration were involved, that's one of the things that brought them displeasure from the big money elites. Like I say, I don't really know. That's just a guess. Again, we have to have an investigation so that all of us can find out who really was behind it, because none of us knows.
Would you like to add anything further?
No, I think that's a good answer.
Great. Well, with that, I think we're out of questions and we're also out of time. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to thank my guests, Dr. Kevin Barrett, Dr. Robert Bowman, and Kevin Ryan for the excellent presentations they gave today. I'd like to thank everybody else in my group. I'd like to thank Libby and Kathy and Kitty and Chris and Craig and let me see, Bill. And I'd like to thank Ernie for giving me all those great DVDs too. And the 9/11 DVD Project and Michael Yee. And I'm sure there's like one else I'm not thinking about. But anyway, I'd like you all to get involved in this further. There's a lot more to do. We've done a lot. We've got a lot more to get done. So please visit our website, a2planet.com, and we'll be following up with more. There'll be an interview with Kevin Barrett posted later, probably by tomorrow. So thank you all for coming, and keep on fighting the good fight.
That's the way it's been for oh so long, and you're so used to it you don't see what's wrong. It's in your history, and if you just look and see that it's repeating. When lawyers' litigation goes without examination, you can bet that it won't take very long. With rules and regulations and without representation, pretty soon you'll sing a slavery song. No, go ahead and go your own merry way, but I can tell you that you'll soon curse the day you were asleep at the wheel. You didn't know what was real. You'll learn the hard way. So how can you get someone to hear when their ears are filled with self-imposed fear? If there's a voice in the crowd that shouts a message out loud, will someone listen? And how can you get someone to see when they can't bring themselves to turn off TV? If someone turns on a light, will others join in the fight or turn a blind eye? When your country's education doesn't teach about your nation, how your family fought so hard to be free, it creates a situation and promotes perpetuation of a people who will live on their knees. No, go ahead and go your own merry way, she'll soon curse the day. You were asleep at the wheel, you didn't care what was real. You'll learn the hard way. When your country's education doesn't teach about your nation, how your family fought so hard to be free, it creates a situation and promotes perpetuation of a people who will live on their knees. No, go ahead and go your own merry way, but I can tell you that you'll soon curse the day. You've been asleep at the wheel, you didn't care what was real. You'll learn the hard way.